Thank you for tuning in to the Astrological Commission podcast. My name is Issachar Bey, and today we have a very, very special guest, somebody who I immensely respect, somebody who I believe, and I say this wholeheartedly, may be one of the best astrologers that is walking the earth right now. And it's an amazing situation when you can see somebody who's has a great love, a great admiration for this thing we call astrology. Somebody who's learned and mastered the art of decoding the language of the heavens. And so I'm extremely excited for this interview. And we have none other than Mychal Bryan. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Issachar. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Could you tell us real quickly, how did you get, what was your first introduction into astrology?
My first introduction to astrology was really through the Kabbalistic Tarot. And I tell people that my school, Oraculos School of Astrology, before it was called Oraculos School of Astrology, it was called Tarot Dharma, because I've studied Western mysticism as well as Eastern mysticism. And so for me, those two words coming together, tarot and dharma, just made sense because my school was really this crossing point of my Western mystical studies and my Eastern mystical studies. But no one really understood that astrology was a part of that when we had the name Tarot Dharma. So then after that, I changed the name to the Oraculos School of Modern Alchemy. And because I thought that was truer to what we were doing in terms of teaching astrology and teaching tarot and teaching numerology and teaching hermeticism. And I thought that name would just make sense, Oraculos School of Modern Alchemy. But then nobody really understood what that meant because nobody really, and I won't say nobody, but I think that in general, people don't really have a context for how sweeping the subject of alchemy is, or even the fact that tarot is an alchemical subject and that astrology, by extension, is also an alchemical subject. So after that, I finally settled on the name Oraculos School of Astrology, and we've been that ever since. And I say all that to say that tarot was my first entry point into astrology, because when I first started the tarot, I think my first book was The Idiot's Guide to the Tarot. And there was something about that just felt very basic. And I'm very grateful that after I had moved beyond that book, I moved directly into the Golden Dawn material on the tarot with works from Arthur Edward Waite and Aleister Crowley and Paul Foster Case, who I believe Paul Foster Case is one of the greatest tarot practitioners who's ever lived. And I dove into that work, and it was so rich and so fulfilling and so much more in-depth than The Idiot's Guide to Tarot. And it really allowed me to see these ways in which astrology informs everything that we see when we pick up a deck of tarot cards. And it's because of the Kabbalistic Tarot and studying the Kabbalistic Tarot that I got into traditional astrology, because the Kabbalistic Tarot is based on traditional astrology, on the 7 classical planets ruling the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so I tell people that I really didn't know for a very long time that people even thought that Uranus ruled Aquarius, or that Pluto ruled Scorpio, or that Neptune ruled Pisces, because within the Kabbalistic Tarot and within that worldview, we're still using the 7 classical planets to rule the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so my education in astrology really began there, and I wouldn't be the astrologer I am today if it weren't for the Kabbalistic Tarot.
That's very interesting. And then once you got into astrology, who were some of your first teachers or the first people who you studied? Like, what books did you buy, or who did you study under?
Mm-hmm. When I first got into astrology, I was still living in the Bahamas, and there wasn't anybody around to reference as a teacher or as anything, really. So I really entered my professional client practice with everything. With it was tarot, it was astrology, it was numerology, it was the runes. I really entered my professional practice when I was around the age of 13 years old. And I made a lot of mistakes because I was pretty much teaching myself. I was teaching myself essentially, and I didn't really know what I was doing for a long time, but I had a sense of what a reading should be. And I'm not even sure where that sense came from. I just felt like if we were doing something that was supposed to be magical, then we should be able to give a person an experience of magic. And so from a very young age, from around the age between 13 and 15, when I was really getting my feet wet, and then when I was 16 in university, I was partially supporting myself financially in university by giving professional readings because at the age of 16, I was already a highly skilled professional consultant. And I think that, where was I going with this? What I was going to say was that I had this internal sense that people needed an experience of magic. So from a very young age, it just made sense to me that if somebody was coming to me for a reading, that person shouldn't tell me their entire life story first. That person shouldn't tell me whether they were married or whether they have children or whether their father was abusive or whether their mother hated them or whether they had siblings or whether they came from a happy home or whether they have a job that they find fulfillment in or whether they. I just felt that if somebody was coming to me for a reading, I should be able to tell them those things before they asked me those things. And so that internal orientation, which once again, I have no idea where it came. I think it came from the fact that I'm from the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is a very no BS sort of place. And in the Caribbean, we really don't have time to believe people for a very long time before they actually prove to us their worth. And that's just something that exists within Caribbean culture in general. We'll give everybody a platform to talk or to promote themselves, but at some point they have to show the magic of what they do. And so for me, showing the magic of everything I do, whether it's the magic of an astrology reading or the magic of a tarot reading or the magic of anything, it really meant being able to speak a person's story to them before they told me what that story was. And that orientation has informed how I do astrology, how I practice astrology. When I give a blind chart reading, I'm giving it from that basis. And when I moved to America, well, even before I moved to the States, I went to my first astrology conference in 2018, and that was, pardon me, that was the United Astrology Conference, which was hosted in Chicago. And it was at that conference that I realized, wow, I'm not alone in this. There are all of these people here who are doing exactly what I do. And wow, there's a certification exam for this. I need to go and get certified. Because once again, from the Caribbean, like paper and certificates and these things matter to Caribbean people as a part of showing that you're qualified. So I started the NCGR process, and I did that with Mira Epstein, who gave a talk on the NCGR examination at the UAC conference. And I think from there, I really wanted to make sure that the information that I had within myself was up to the standards of what was being taught in America. And once again, that's another Caribbean thing, because I think that as Caribbean people, we tend to have this inbuilt inferiority complex where we need to make sure that what we're doing is good enough for America in order for it to be good enough in general. So I think after 2018, after taking the NCGR exams under Mira, I just started to reach out to everybody, and I started to reach out to people for Uranian astrology, and I started to reach out to other people who said that they could do what I could do in terms of blind chart readings. And within that time, I met very few people who I was genuinely impressed by, and I met a lot of people who I didn't really understand how they held the title of being a professional astrologer. And some of those people who I was genuinely impressed by were Faith McInerney, and Faith McInerney, from the perspective of the work that she does with Uranian astrology, I think that she's the best, hands down, in the world as far as Uranian astrology interpretation is concerned. There are people who are very good in terms of Uranian astrology technique, but there's no one who is as good at Uranian astrology interpretation as Faith McInerney. And I say that, and I will die with that being my truth, because I've seen everyone, as anyone who is anyone in Uranian astrology, I've seen them, and Faith McInerney is hands down the best. And I study with Gary Kristen, and Gary Kristen is also phenomenal in terms of Uranian astrology. He's a wonderful technician in Uranian astrology, and he's also a wonderful astrologer. Nicholas Smuts Alsop, who I didn't really study with for that long, truly, but when I say that I study with people, what I mean is that I'm paying them to see them read a chart, and I'm looking at their technique, and I'm seeing what they're doing and what decisions they're making and how they're going about it. Like, that's what I mean when I say I'm studying with people. And so those are some of the people who I've had the ability to see read a chart up close, and I think that they're really phenomenal at what they do, and I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity to see their example and to see where I stood in relation to their example, so that I could see the ways in which I can improve my own approach to client work.
Yeah, man, you are 100% right. My father is from Trelawney, Jamaica, and he is that way. Always go to school, get your degree. It's always about school, education. You want to be the best of the best. So yeah, you definitely. I definitely know about the whole Caribbean thing, because I used to go to Jamaica. I've been going to Jamaica every year since I was young. So, but yeah, I definitely understand that. But I just think it was absolutely amazing how you were able to, at that young age of 13 and 16, and to already be at a professional level because of doing so many readings. You get good, and of course, when you're doing the readings, the people are confirming what you're seeing. They're confirming the thing, so it allows, okay, every time I see this configuration with the charts, with the planets, or the configuration with these particular aspects, I'm noticing that people are confirming, and I just think that's amazing, because there's no way to teach it in experience. So for you to get out there and do all of those charts, that's why when I watch you, those of you who are listening, you can go to the Oraculos School of Astrology. You can go to his YouTube page where he gives the blind readings, and you can see how he just approaches the chart. And it's magnificent. It's systematic. He has a system in place, and if you follow the system, the information he gets is unbelievable. And then the feedback he gets. I remember one of the ones I was watching. You got into the medical aspect, we're going to talk about very briefly, and you were talking about different things that was wrong, could be wrong with the woman, as far as like her ovaries, or just all kind of stuff. And she was like, yes, I've had these issues, I've had this. I was just like, wow, this guy's great. Then I went to London the year before last to the Astrological Association conference, my first time going, and I went to your class. Unfortunately, you couldn't make it, but you were there via Zoom, and you did a live blind chart reading in the class. And everybody was just sitting there with their mouths open, like, "Oh my God, this guy's amazing!" And so it's great to have that event-based, to the practical, not the philosophical, not the psychological, but to give me concrete-based, because that's what we come to. When I come to an astrologer, I have a problem, I have issues, I have things that are going wrong. My life is turned upside down, and I need concrete answers. I need to know why, how, when, where.
Right.
And so just to see how you approach the chart, and then how you're also very fluent in so many different things as far as the tarot, the ruins, the numerology, all of those. And what's great is all those things, they actually confirm. They're not neglecting, or they're not opposing each other. They all come together in harmony. So I think that's phenomenal. So after you studied with all of them, when did you move into, like, let me go ahead and really push this Oraculos school, because this has been the thing. Once you put the Oraculos out, man, it seems like things really took off, and you became especially more visible to us here.
Yeah, I think, and thank you so much for that. I think that so Tarot Dharma, which once again was the first iteration of Oraculos, Tarot Dharma existed from 2015. I think that my first class that I taught with one person in it was in 2015. And so I like to tell people that Oraculos was founded in 2015, but I think that the name Oraculos School of Astrology only really came on board after UAC. UAC 2018, and I think it must have been in around January 2019 that name Oraculos School of Astrology was specifically the name of what we were and what we had become. And so I'm saying all of that to say that I already had a professional practice, a thriving professional practice by the age of 16. By the age of 18, I've internally felt as if I was a seasoned practitioner, and because I had been giving readings all throughout university at that point, and I had already graduated from university. And by the age of 25, I feel like I was a quote-unquote veteran in the field, basically. So a lot of what I did in America after going to UAC was really a matter of seeing whether or not I had enough information to truly be worthy to teach people. And there was a lot that I learned. There was a lot that I learned from studying with astrologers in America. But I think the biggest thing I learned wasn't even technique, because when you look at how I give a reading, and you look at how Mira Epstein or Lee Lehman or Gary Kristen or Nicholas Matalsov or anybody else gives a reading, those are people who I think are great, and those are people who I've invested money into learning with. Nothing that I do, there's nothing within my work that looks remotely similar to Mira's work or to Nicola's work or to Faith's work or to Gary's work or to anybody's work. Because my system of approaching a chart and my system of reading a chart is completely something that I created myself. And what I have drawn from those people who I've mentioned isn't necessarily the techniques that they use, but it's this underlying commitment to read a chart in a concrete way. And that for me is the most important thing, that because there are many things that those astrologers do that I would never personally do, and there are many things that those astrologers do that I would never personally teach, because I, once again, as a person from the Caribbean, I want to find the way to do it in the best way possible without doing anything superfluous or without doing anything that I personally don't think is necessary per se. So my way of reading a chart is very streamlined. It's very to the point. It's very direct. It's very, this is an apple is a fruit, and an apple can be eaten. I don't really go in, I'm not really a philosophical / inspirational person. That's always been one of my downfalls in life, that I don't really know how to speak to people's, I don't know, I'm not like an inspirational person. I'm a very down to earth, practical Caribbean man. And I think that my astrology, it looks like that. And so when I look at the people who I've mentioned, what stands out for me most in terms of the time that I've spent with any of those people is the fact that those people were able to demonstrate concrete chart reading skills in their own way, whether I agreed with their techniques or not, whether I thought that what they did was necessary or not. Whatever they did, within the context of what they did, they were able to concretely read a chart in an event-based way. And that example that those people carry within their practice is something that I hold as essential value within my practice, and it's something that I teach my students. So after I think 2018, going to UAC, seeing things that I didn't know were possible, and then seeing things that I always knew were possible, I made the decision that I know enough to be teaching at a conference like this. And so I think it was the summer of 2019 that Oraculos finally opened its doors virtually. No, it was no. Yes, it was that summer because I had started by teaching a group from Jamaica because my family is from Jamaica as well. So I started by teaching a group that was based in Kingston, Jamaica, and I was teaching them virtually. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, I think in September of 2020, that's when I started, or that's when Oraculos opened up to serve a wider US-based audience. And I think that was, 5 years ago, going on to 6 years ago at this point. And yeah, we've been thriving ever since.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And then, so you go through all of this, you just keep getting better and better. You just keep sharpening the knowledge, sharpening the wisdom, and then you give us a gift. You come out and you give us a gift that was amazing, which was the Mastering Traditional Astrology. I call it a textbook. I mean, when you get this, it's a study guide. And I was so happy, man. Let me explain to you why. Number one, you don't see many of us thriving at the level as you are in the astrology. When you went to UAC, you could see what I'm talking about. There wasn't too many of us, but not so much that there are too many of us, but not only are you worthy or experienced to be at that level, but then you're just at a higher altered level of consciousness. Like I just feel like you're taking your stance on the front lines of astrology, and you're definitely moved the needle. You moved it forward. And when I got this book, man, I was totally blown away. I said, man, this guy's unbelievable, man. This is great. One of the things that I love about you, like you say about Faith McInerney and Mara, and which I agree with you 1,000%, what makes an astrologer good to me is your approach, your thinking. How do you, like you said, if you're standing over the shoulder of Faith McInerney, you want to see how she reads a chart. You want to see this, you want to see that. And I've been able to just very briefly stand over your shoulder to see how you delineate these blind reading charts and just different things that you say. And when I got the book, it was just amazing to me that how you laid this out, man. This was a masterpiece. Now, I'm not. Now, what's great is I'll say this. You have the first one. You gave us the Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, and which is my favorite. Oh man, that I don't know what's something about that book just grabbed me. And then you have the medical one. But tell us about the first one. What made you say, you know what, I'm going to sit down and put this out and actually begin to get into my scribing bag and start to write?
Issachar, I'm so happy that we're having this conversation because one of the things that I noticed at UAC, you were right. I didn't really see many Black astrologers in positions that I would consider to be prominent at UAC. And what I mean by that is that, sure, there are Black astrologers at UAC, but there was an underlying theme in many of the talks that were given by Black astrologers where it was astrology and entrepreneurship, astrology and marketing, astrology and building your business, getting into the astrology business, astrology for your YouTube channel. There was all of this. It seemed as if the people who were in charge at UAC had just collectively made the decision that all the Black people at UAC were going to talk about astrology and marketing, or astrology and entrepreneurship, or astrology and building your brand, or whatever, as if Black people didn't have the ability to talk about technical astrological topics, which was stupid to me. It was ridiculous. And I think that in 2020, I think I did something called the Black Astrologers Roundtable or something to that effect, and it was kind of in response to what had happened with George Floyd. And so people who I either met through conferences or whatever, I called them together and I was like, hey, let's sit down and let's just have a discussion. And I mentioned this then, and somebody said that Black astrologers just don't have the same opportunities to have the same level of knowledge as the white astrologer who's doing research into Hellenistic astrology or ancient astrology or whatever. And that also for me felt relatively stupid as a reason. And not that I think less of that person, but I just think that response just didn't make sense to me, because ultimately, I mean, we have the resources. The resources are present, whether those resources are present in terms of books, whether those resources are present in terms of online PDFs that you can download free of charge, whether those resources are present in terms of listening to conference recordings or whatever that you can also buy. I think you could buy conference recordings for like, I don't know, $10. You could buy UAC recordings. Maybe it's a little bit more than that. But there are these things that are just available for all of us. And I didn't understand why within all of this information, the Black astrologers seem to only be able to talk about entrepreneurship. And so I said to myself that, Mychal, you just need to write a book. And I have this thing, I don't know if it's a bad habit, but I have this very Jamaican tendency of not thinking that I'm not good enough. I don't internally have a sense that I don't belong someplace. And I don't internally have a sense of victimhood. And I don't internally have a sense of feeling like I'm not worthy of something, because Jamaican people are very proud people. We're very, high-chested people. And we know for a fact that if something exists in the world for somebody else, it also exists in the world for us. So it didn't even occur to me that I shouldn't be able to write a book. It didn't even occur to me that my book should not have been called Mastering Traditional Astrology, and that maybe the name Mastering Traditional Astrology would ruffle people's feathers, until I went to NORWAC the next year, and somebody who had a very large platform at NORWAC, who was giving one of the keynote speeches at NORWAC, said something to the effect of and no astrologer and no book can teach you how to master astrology, no matter what they say. And I was like, wow, this is a person who I thought was my friend, and then this person goes on stage and says that, after at the same time, really propping my book up in other regards. This person went on stage and said, and I was like, wow, it's amazing what people think, and it's amazing how people's thought process comes out. When I named the book Mastering Traditional Astrology, it really wasn't even supposed to have that name. The book's initial name was Foundations of Classical Astrology. And then I said to myself, Mychal, that name is boring. No one's going to buy a book called Foundations of Classical Astrology. That just sounds dumb. Like, why would you even do that? And the reason why I was going to do that was because the course that I teach, my 2-year diploma program that I offer at Oraculos, the first semester of that program is called FOCA, or the Foundations of Classical Astrology. And this book is essentially the textbook for the Foundations of Classical Astrology class. So I just thought it made sense to name it that same thing. But at some point, I said to myself, Mychal, no one's going to buy a book with a name as boring as that. So I looked up on my bookshelf, and my Hebrew calligraphy teacher, because I studied Hebrew calligraphy for a very long time, my Hebrew calligraphy teacher, Izzy Plodwinski, had published a book probably back in 2012, or I think even before that. And the book was called Mastering Hebrew Calligraphy. And I looked at the shelf and I was like, Mychal, Izzy's doing the calligraphy inside of this book for you already. His book is called Mastering Hebrew Calligraphy. Why not just name your book Mastering Traditional Astrology, since essentially that's what the purpose of the book is. The purpose of the book is to give people all the tools they need in order to feel confident and competent in traditional astrology, while still knowing that this book is just an entry point. But I said, name it that. And that's why I named the book that. And I think people thought that I named the book Mastering Traditional Astrology because I think I'm better than other people or because of whatever. And it's not even that. It's that fundamentally, at the core of any technical practice, it should be the desire to master that practice. And I think in the West, particularly in America, people are uncomfortable with words like mastery because people don't like to work hard. And I think it's a particularly American dilemma that this idea of the word mastery feels, it feels like when you use the word mastery that there's something arrogant about you, when in fact, if you're doing anything that is a technical skill, you should hope to master that technical skill at some point in time. When we're playing the piano and we're learning a difficult piece, our intention is to master the piece that we're learning. At this moment, I'm in Harlem, New York, because I'm teaching at the Dance Theater of Harlem. And the students who are in my class, their intention is to master what it is I'm teaching them. And they're going to practice and practice and practice and practice until they master what they're learning. And in all of the liberal arts, mastery is something to be aspired towards. And so I don't know why when it comes to things like astrology, when we say words like mastery within the context of someone's astrology practice, you hear people say, oh, you can't master astrology because it's a lifelong blah, 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 and it's a journey. Sure, we know that. On a philosophical level, we know it's a journey. It's going to last for your entire life. You're going to grow old and still have another lifetime to study astrology because there's so much to learn. But there are things that are objectifiably masterable within astrology, and we should all aim to master those things if we are going to present ourselves as professional astrologers. So the purpose of that book, of the book Mastering Astrology, was to pretty much just lay a foundation for everything that you need to know before actually getting into professional practice, knowing that you're going to spend your entire lifetime trying to master this field.
And that you did. I mean, you did lay it out. It was a. Now, you know what's amazing to me is this is when I knew that you were different and that you were exactly what I thought you were. Let me tell you why. You talk about going to UAC and you talk about all these other astrologers and all these big names and all this stuff. It made me feel so good in my heart when this happened. I had a conversation with Anthony Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, Issachar, you know what? I was getting ready to put my book out about Horary, and I was getting ready to put this book out, How to Find Missing Items. And I gave it to Mychal, and I told him to go over it. I wanted to get his opinion. I wanted him to tell me what he thought about it before I put it out. And when he said that, I said, oh my God, that's so awesome that he respected your opinion so much that before he put it out, he wanted it to hit your hands and for you to go over it and say what you thought. Yes, no, I agree with this, I disagree with this. And I just thought, oh my God, man, that's amazing that you have mastered your art that much that now you have been considered. And I just thought that was awesome, man. I just thought that because to me, you know, when you get into astrology, there is no color.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, if you understand the language and you understand, but for to see that these astrologers who respect you like that, I knew that at that moment when he told me that, I knew I was on that. What I thought and what I saw was 100% right. Another thing that I love what I saw from a distance is your implementation of yoga. I just find it to be so fascinating because, you know, we see people doing yoga, but for me to watch you doing yoga, it's almost like it's a religion, like it's something that you don't just do just to do. It's something that you do on purpose. You can tell that it's something that deals with the inner workings of consciousness, your spirituality. It just seems that you're not, you know, you see people doing yoga all the time, but when I see you do it and I say, man, this guy is, he's a real yogi. He's a guru. And so I just think that when I see stuff like that, to me, that lets me know that your consciousness has been elevated to such a level, man, that's just unbelievable. When I'm listening to you now, all the different things that you're doing with teaching people and stuff, and and teaching dance, and just to see all the different variables of what you do, I just think it's fascinating. You gave us the masterpiece, and then you come back with another one with the Horary Astrology. And those of you who are listening, please go to his YouTube page. Please sign up for his newsletter. I get his newsletter all the time. And he, even though he's been extremely busy, he used to do these like blind readings, and he used to do the Horary where he'd come in and it was just fascinating. One of the things that you're the only person that I heard, maybe you and Deborah Holding were the only person that I ever heard say this, that when you learn astrology, you should learn Horary first. And when I heard you say it, and I began to read the book, I said, yeah, it makes sense. It does make sense. Tell us about the second book that you did.
Yeah, I didn't know that Deb said that, and I'm very happy that she did. And it makes sense that she would say that because because Horary is pretty much the main staple of what is taught at her school, and so it just makes sense that would be her philosophy. But I think even beyond that, it just makes sense from a pedagogical perspective to learn Horary astrology first. Horary astrology is the astrology of answering questions. Clients come to us with questions, and the only astrologers who I think are incapable of answering questions are astrologers who are purely trained in the modern way. Modern astrology has a very set template for what a reading looks like. And that very set template is, we're going to talk to you about your sun, moon, and rising. After we're done talking to you about your sun, moon, and rising, we're then going to talk to you about how many planets you have in your chart, in the fire sign, and in the water sign, and in the earth sign, and in the air sign. And then after that, we're going to talk to you about the shape of your chart, whether it's shaped like a bucket or a seesaw or the finger of God or whatever. And then after that, we're going to talk to you about your south node and who you were in the past life. And then after that, we're going to talk to you about your hemispheric balance and whether you have more planets on the right side or the left side or above the horizon or below the horizon. And so modern astrology has this laundry list of things that it needs to do. But in the process of fulfilling that laundry list, all of those things, none of which is concrete, by the way, because all of that is, it's just fascinating how you could give an entire reading for 2 hours long and not answer one concrete concern of a person. All of that is psychological. When a modern astrologer tells you about your sun, moon, and rising, they're giving you a psychological reading. When a modern astrologer tells you how many planets you have in the fire sign, earth sign, water sign, whatever sign, they're giving you a psychological reading. When they talk about your chart emphasis, they're giving you a psychological reading. Hemispheric emphasis, psychological reading. All of that is psychological. So it's fascinating to me that that style of astrology could even have the level of reach that it has, because at some point, and I'm not even trying to be a hater or anything, but I think at some point we have to realize how useless that is to actually tell us anything else about our lives other than the psychological constitution of who we are. And truthfully, we live in an age where that is a main preoccupation of people. Now, in the 21st century, more than ever before, people want to know who they are. And modern astrology has risen to that occasion to tell people exactly who they are and to take 3 hours to do it without actually answering any of the other existential questions that exist within a person's life. Because after you've taken 3 hours out of my time, spanning either one very long session or 3 1-hour-long sessions, what else are you going to tell me after that? After you've already told me who I am from the day I was born to the life that I lived before I was even born, what else are you going to tell me about my life right now? Are you going to tell me, am I going to be rich? Am I going to be poor? Is my sibling going to die? Am I going to have a good relationship with my sibling? Is my father an alcoholic? Is my father going to love me? Am I going to come from a stable family? Will I ever have a home? Will I ever have children? Will me and my children get along? Will I ever get sick? What type of sickness will I have? Will I ever get married? Will we stay married or will I divorce? All of these other questions are just as important and just as integral to a life as who am I? And the modern astrologer can only answer who am I, and they can't answer anything else. However, horary astrology, it forces your mind to be in a question answering orientation, which is a very important thing in the learning process of learning astrology, because astrologers are meant to answer people's questions. So for me, I don't have the same orientation to horary astrology as many of my other horary colleagues do, because for me, horary astrology isn't the be-all and the end-all of my life by any stretch of the imagination. It's not the be-all and the end-all of what I teach by any stretch of the imagination. And I really just wrote the horary book because it's an important part of our astrological heritage, and a book should have been written about it, because what I'm doing in the process of writing these books is I'm laying out the entire curriculum that I teach at Oraculos. And horary is within that first semester of what I teach at Oraculos. So the first two books, Mastering Traditional Astrology and Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, those two books represent the first 4 months of training at the Oraculos School of Astrology. However, after I'm done teaching horary within that first semester, I put it down, and we never pick it up again within the context of our 2-year diploma program, because the task would have already been fulfilled. And what is the task of teaching horary for me? The task of teaching horary for me is teaching astrologers how to answer questions specifically from the chart and nowhere else, and teaching them how to create within themselves the critical thinking skills necessary to come to a concrete answer, and to not ease up on themselves until they have provided a concrete answer to their client. That is the purpose of horary astrology, because I want for the astrologers to then take that skill of answering a question in a clear and a concrete way, and then move into their natal astrology practice with that same level of clarity and technical proficiency and ability to organize themselves to move through that chart until that chart gives them the answer that they're seeking. So for me, that's really the importance of horary. Horary is, in my worldview, not in other people's worldview, but in my worldview, horary is meant to teach people, or I use horary to train my students to develop a critical question answering frame of mind, because I want them to take that essence into their natal astrology practice, into their mundane astrology practice, into their medical astrology practice, into every other astrological sphere they'll ever enter.
Yeah, and like I said, it's one of my favorites. It's a phenomenal read. I definitely think everybody should just get all the books. And then, I mean, like I said, he's a yogi. He's constantly tapping into the universal the universal presence, and he just keeps elevating higher and higher. When he put out this book, the New Western Medical Astrology, Pathways Towards the Cosmos Indwelling, I said, my God, this guy's not playing. To see you moving into the medical field, this is so profound to me, because so many people need this, man. This is, oh my God, man, this is amazing for you to take the gift of divination, the gift of all your experience, your wisdom and knowledge, and now you're moving into a place now where you can now help people who are having all kind of issues. I even seen back not too many months ago, you were calling for charts of people who had kind of infirmities and any kind of issues, so that you can research and really. And I just thought that was so phenomenal, man. This and tell me what made you move into the medical field, man. This is amazing.
Yeah, once again, coming from the Caribbean, I came from a family that wanted me to be a doctor. I think that that's just a real thing within my family, and I come from a very medically adjacent family. There's a lot of people in my family. Well, I wouldn't even say a lot of people, but my grandfather got very ill. He had a stroke. And so we lived in a very medically adjacent household. As a result of that, there were doctors in and out of there. One of the doctors was my biological grandmother, who was his physiotherapist. Within the context of the yoga work that I've done, I've also focused primarily on medical yoga or yoga therapy specifically. And so at the beginning of my yoga practice, I was just inundated with all of these women who had female reproductive health issues because my yoga teacher, Dr. Lois Steinberg, she specifically focuses on, or one of her specific areas of expertise is yoga for female reproductive health issues. So I've just been inundated from the very beginning of my yoga teaching with the charts of all of these women who have these reproductive health concerns. And so it's just always been a part of my life. And I've always been medically adjacent myself. I've taught for doctors, like I've taught within medical spaces. I've taught yoga within medical spaces for doctors. I've taught doctors in training about how we approach therapy within the context of yoga. I've taught doctors in training from the University of Central Arkansas when for 2 years in a row they would come to the Bahamas and bring their students, and I would teach them how we approach yoga and posture and healing or therapy from a yoga perspective. And so I've always lived in that realm. When physiotherapists met speed bumps with their own clients, they would send their clients to me to help rectify the issues that they had. So this idea of helping and healing has just always been a part of my life. And so it was a natural next step for me in terms of my astrology practice to meld my love of medicine and my love of astrology into one space. The problem with that for me was that medical astrology, as it's written about in many books, and particularly in many modern books, it sounds like the type of astrology that I personally don't enjoy. Because when you pick up many modern medical astrology books, it carries the essence of sun sign astrology, which for me is really and truly the worst part of our astrological practice. So when you pick up a medical astrology book and it says to you, because you have the sun in Taurus, you should wear a scarf to protect your throat because Tauruses are more prone to throat issues, or because you're a Cancer, you need to be mindful of what you eat because Cancers are more prone to digestive health issues. For me, that sounds just about as stupid as saying to somebody that they're going to like sex because they're a Scorpio, or they're going to be, they're going to be reckless because they're an Aries. Fine. For certain people, that makes sense to say things to people like that. It doesn't make sense for me to say things to people like that because I don't view astrology in that way. I don't have a big three orientation to say, oh, tell me your sun, moon, and your rising, and I'll tell you your personality. That's never been my approach to astrology. No one has ever learned that from me at Oraculos, and nobody ever will. Because I think that this idea of reducing ourselves to individual signs of the zodiac is really a waste of our astrological time and of our astrological ability. So it's something that I don't do. It's also something I've never done. And so the problem for me when I wanted to personally start studying medical astrology was that a light perusal of the medical astrology content that already existed showed me that I would only aggravate and annoy myself if I studied medical astrology as it's currently popularly taught today, and I would only end up pissing myself off. And so I wanted to create an approach to medical astrology that was directly in alignment with the type of astrology I already practice. And I realized that the only way for that to happen would be for me to do a boatload of research And that research wouldn't come from me looking at the chart of Michael Jackson or the chart of Whitney Houston. That research would come from me looking at hundreds of thousands of charts of real people who submitted their charts for the purpose of my medical astrology research. And so that's what we did at Oraculos. We put out a call for the charts of hundreds of people, and literally we have thousands of charts at Oraculos of medical astrology cases. And that is where we built what is essentially the new Western Medical Astrology. That's the name of the book, but that's also the name of exactly what we did. We created a new Western Medical Astrology that was purely focused on the planetary combinations that exist within the chart, and it had nothing at all to do with the fact that you're an Aries or you're a Taurus or you're a Gemini or you're whatever. And so that, for me, is the direction that my astrological teaching is going. And that really, for me, is the direction my astrological teaching has always been in. I've always been a planet-to-planet focused sort of person. I've always been an aspect-based sort of person. I'm really not a placement-based person, which is why talking about planets and signs of the zodiac for me is just highly not up my alley. And so I wrote a book on medical astrology that expresses a medical astrological viewpoint that I've never seen anywhere else before. And I'm very grateful about the reception that that book has had, because, you know, we've sold hundreds of copies. The book just came out in May, and I'm very happy that people are enjoying the work and that they're really resonating with my approach to aspect-based medical astrology, as opposed to any other style that's currently popular.
I mean, you 100%, 1,000% correct, because out of all the medical astrology books I've written, there's nothing like this. And for you to create this new paradigm, I think that this is phenomenal, man. I think that we're on to something here. And that, you know, and like I said, you're on the forefront of really moving astrology forward. And, you know, I feel that that's greatly important, because, you know, a lot of times when we look at astrology now, it's very commercial. It's very, you know, bubblegum. It's very, you know, cookbook, you know, but when you get to the practicality of it and you get into stuff like this is what astrology is about. It's about taking it to the next level. And I think that you've done that. Very quickly, just before we end, I always like to do this, but unfortunately, I don't have to do this with you. I like to ask astrologers what is their favorite forecasting or prediction technique. But there's a man by the name of Jean-Baptiste Morin, and I've heard you speak about this guy very often, and that you've taken some of his teachings and incorporated it into your solar return. Now, when I heard you teach this is why I'm taking the class, and those of you, we'll have the links where you can join this weekend for the intensive. And he's also having an intensive in October. Am I correct, for the medical?
Yes, I am.
All right, right. When I heard you talk about the solar return, like, you know, I studied a little bit of Charles Emerson's, because he, you know, had the natal 90-degree dial, and then he had the solar return 90-degree dial, and he always said you have to have two charts side by side. You know, he used to say that all the time. But when I heard you start talking about the 12 harmonic solar returns, the demi, I started hearing you talk about the quad, and I said, wait a minute, this guy's really going in. And I said, you know what, I got to take the class, because I'm a prediction forecasting guy. I'm a concrete guy. I need, you know, so for you to have the secret sauce, I need to have it. And so I will be there. I will be there with bells on, because I need that secret sauce, because, man, your approach to prediction and different things like that is phenomenal, man. And I was just like, when I started hearing you talk about all of this stuff, I'm like, oh man, this guy this is really good. I need the secret sauce. And so, you know, so I'm definitely excited about that. And, you know, I love to see, you know, how your students are now. If you go to the website, your students are now available. They give readings. You know, you really have evolved, man, and you're pouring into your students. You're pouring into them, and they are becoming, coming outright on their own. They're able to stand forth and really stand on the mantle that you've built. And it must make you very proud to see that, man. To see that your labor has not gone in vain. But I am also happy about the reception of your medical book, because I think what you're doing is phenomenal, and it definitely coincides with my statement. And I'll say this, and a lot of people may get upset, but I believe, and I mean, this is a very hard statement, that you probably are the best astrologer walking on the face of the earth. Not because of just the books you've written, but your mindset, your approach to astrology, and how you're pushing the needle forward. Those of you that are listening to me, read his books. Go to his site. Go to his YouTube page. Just take your time and just begin to start watching his videos. Watch his podcast. Watch his live blind chart readings. Watch his Horary. He does, and then when he does the blind chart readings, there's one when he got into about the woman with the moon Neptune, and it's phenomenal. You get to hear. This is how you sharpen your skills. This is by listening and being able to hear what he's talking about. And I think that it's something that's absolutely phenomenal. I think that what he's doing is definitely next level. And I think that he's in a class all by himself. I think that he's left Earth. and it's phenomenal, because he's also incorporated so many other things. So it's not just the astrology. When you follow him, he's very heavily standing direct on politics. He lets you know how he feels about politics. He lets you know how he lets you know how he feels about when he does his yoga and all of his meditations and stuff. And I just think that it's a phenomenal thing. Also, you're currently in Boston, right? That's where you live at?
I live in Boston, but right now I'm in Harlem.
But what made you relocate to Boston? I always wanted to ask you that. What in your chart? What in your chart made you relocate?
Well, I'll tell you, love made me relocate to Boston.
Okay.
and so I moved to Boston for a relationship, and yeah, I'm really happy about that decision, because there's one thing about living in the Caribbean where you can go so far, but I think that in order to really show the world who we are and what we do, we need to be in a wider space. And I think there's no wider space than the United States of America. And sure, there's a lot of untapped interest in Europe, for example, and a lot of untapped interest in Canada, as well as also in Australia. But I think there's something so special about being US based, because when you're US based, you really are setting yourself up to be seen by everyone. And so I'm very grateful to be here. I think it was a great decision for me to move here. And I don't know if I'm going to stay long term or where in the US I'll be based long term, but I do know that I feel like coming to the States has really helped me step forward in terms of the service that I offer, the professionalism, and the level that I do it at. And I'm really grateful for that experience.
Definitely. As we get ready to close, just give our listeners the ways that they can contact you, the ways that they can follow you and join the Oraculos mailing list and keep on top of everything that you have upcoming and that you're offering.
Awesome. So if you want to stay in contact, you can reach out to us at oraculosastrology.com. That's ORACULOS, oraculosastrology.com. And you can also keep in contact via email at hello@oraculosastrology.com. And you can find me on Facebook at Mychal A. Bryan, MYCHAL A. Bryan, BRYAN. And yeah, those are some of the top ways to stay in contact. We answer every email. We get back to everyone. So if you have any interest at all in being connected with the work that we do at Oraculos, then, hop on over to our website, join our mailing list, and so you could be a part of the magic of what we're building over at the Oraculos School of Astrology.
Mychal, we wanted to thank you for being a guest on our show. We wanted to give you your flowers and let you know that we appreciate you and that we honor you because you are moving astrology forward. I don't know if anybody has told you that we appreciate you and that you're appreciated, because maybe sometimes in your practice you're just going and going and going, and people are telling you yes, yes, and this and that. But I want you to know there's some people on the outside who are supporting you, who are fans, who are looking at you and letting you know we appreciate you, to let you know that the hard work is not in vain, and that we see what you're doing and we see where you're going, and we're glad that you're pushing the needle forward, because you're creating your own trailblaze. You're trailblazing your own path, and it's amazing. It's phenomenal to see. It's phenomenal to see a young black man to be able to do what you've done. It's phenomenal, man, and I just want to thank you and give you your flowers. And I got to tell you this, Bryan, Mr. Bryan, we love you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Izakar, thank you so much, and I really appreciate hearing that, because I think it's right. It's very easy for me to get down and do the work and only focus on that, but I think it's always very humbling to see what my work looks like through the eyes of other people, and so I'm very grateful. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Oh, thank you so much. And those of you who are listening, please join us this weekend for the intensive. And then also, if you can, meet us into the Oraculos diploma course, where we can learn how to become many Mychal Bryans and begin to change the world. So we thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you continue to do the great things that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Izakar. Have a good one.